us tonight for Nerd Night. My name is Emily Scicluna, or Millie as I'm most commonly known as. I was a PhD candidate at La Trobe University. I recently submitted my thesis a couple months ago. Thank you! I am currently a research associate at the University of Melbourne. I'm not very patiently awaiting my thesis corrections, and then I will have people refer to me forevermore as Dr. Dunnart. So I'd like to start by acknowledging, oh my goodness, oh my God, these slides, very sensitive. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of Aboriginal Australia, the land in which I do my research, and that is the Wurundjeri, Wadawurrung, Djabwurrung, Giladjurrung, Juragudurrung, Jirawarrung, Guditjmara and Barrabarabba people, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. So this story starts with the basalt grasslands, and these are a critically endangered ecosystem in Victoria, and there's less than 1% of this habitat remaining. So this is actually a more critically endangered habitat than a lot of the more well-known ones. So our rainforests, our coral reefs and whatnot, this is right up there. While feral cats and foxes, we know, are responsible for considerable population declines of our grassland fauna, the overwhelming factor prompting the dramatic decline of our grassland species is simply the loss of appropriate habitat, and that is because a lot of this ecosystem has been destroyed. So the features of our basalt grasslands include a native community of grasses characterised by the intertussock spaces that occur between them, and these spaces are integral in allowing grassland fauna to find their food. Then we have our basalt rocks and heavily fertile soils, so it's really healthy soils, which unfortunately meant that they were fantastic when European settlers arrived with sheep and whatnot, so they were really good for rearing livestock. That was not to their benefit. These heavily fertile soils waterlog over the winter months. They become really clammy, really organic, and they form deep soil cracks over summer when they bake in the summer sun. Okay, so it's quite a dynamic ecosystem and it changes across the year. This is a great diagram from Land of Sweeping Plains, and it clearly shows the pre-European and grassland distribution across Victoria, ACT and New South Wales. So the remnant habitat that we're currently working with is in purple. There's a few different types of grasslands. There's basalt grasslands, different versions of temperate grasslands. So basically, if you draw a line between Melbourne and Adelaide, that all used to be these kind of grasslands. And if you've been through that area now, you'll know that that's all agricultural land. So since European settlement, Australia has lost over 100 species to extinction. 34 of those were mammals. 20 of those were either solely or in some way dependent on these grasslands. So every species that you see up there is either completely extinct from our basalt grasslands on the mainland of Australia. I say on the mainland because the eastern quoll over to the left, they still do occur in Tasmania, fortunately. Or all of these other species used to occur readily across Victoria as well, but we don't have them across our basalt grasslands anymore. Introducing the thing that I'm very nerdy about, and that is the fat-tailed dunnarts, or as I like to call them, the dunnies. They are a member of the Dasyuridae family, which means they are carnivorous marsupials, and they are a nocturnal species widespread across Australia. So they predominantly live off insects and big crunchy vertebrates, things like beetles, moths, wolf spiders, crickets, cockroaches is what they like best. This species is a little bit smaller than a house mouse, and they weigh about 15 grams, which is equivalent to 3 grapes, if you would like that equivalent. They get their name for good reason, because they do store fat in their tail, much like a camel's hump. So they have an energy reserve in there, and you know if you've got a fat-tailed dunnart, then that's a happy dunnart. So that tail does change shape depending on the season and depending on food availability. The other thing about them is that they are ferocious. Do not let those little snoots fool you. My favourite fact about this species is that they will nest share with invasive house mice over the winter months because it's super cold, so they'll snuggle up next to them. And come the warmer months, they will actually turn on their bedfellows and eat them. And I really love that. I really love that fact. So these guys, look at those teeth. Look at those teeth. Those are my hands holding that dunnart. They live under rocks and logs, and they are renowned as being the only small ground-dwelling mammal to persist in grassland ecosystems across Victoria. So these are the last ones, the last small marsupials of all those other ones that I showed you up there that are now extinct. These ones are the last ones. And importantly, they are renowned for being able to persist and doing okay in those agricultural landscapes. So I mentioned that these guys are carnivorous marsupials. I thought I'd show you some other members of the family Dasyuridae to put them into context for you. So while they are around the same size as a mouse, they absolutely are not rodents. These are, I get very offended when people relate them to rodents. They are cousins of things like the thylacine, the quolls, our Tasmanian devils. So these guys truly are, yeah, they're tiny little carnivorous marsupials. They're just in a lot smaller body than some of our larger ones. Across Australia, there are two genetically distinguished, geographically isolated populations of fat-tailed dunnarts. So they are separated by the Murray River in blue. Unfortunately, the dunnarts cannot swim across the Murray River, so they're actually separated. And my research is focused on those in the basalt grasslands, which is in pink, or the Victorian grasslands. So, along with being genetically distinct, there's also, morphological difference, a difference in appearance. And that is that those that occur across the more arid environments, so the more desert areas, they live in more sandy environments. So you'll notice that their fur is a lot more sandy coloured. They're a lot more orange, more brown. They also seem to have more elongated snouts. And I believe that's because of crunching up all of those big desert invertebrates. Whereas our dunnarts on the right, which are a lot darker, they camouflage a lot better with those heavily fertile basalt soils in Victoria. So they're much sort of better equipped for that landscape. When I started my research, and it was in February 2018 that I commenced my PhD, the conservation classifications for fat-tailed dunnarts looked at the entire species distribution as a whole. So they included all of the whole distribution. They looked at dunnarts across the country, and no one had really thought about the fact that they couldn't swim across the Murray River. So, that became something that I identified and thought, oh, well, hang on, I think that there might be two different populations here. So basically, I dove into the literature and did find out that there are two genetically distinguished groups. They have vastly different threats because they occupy vastly different habitats. And so the fat-tailed dunnart at the time was listed as least concern internationally and near threatened in Victoria, but they did not have any statutory listing. So basically they weren't protected in any way. The last surveys conducted on this species were in the 70s, and literature still cited those studies as evidence for how the dunnarts are doing in the wild. So I kind of flagged, well, hang on, that was 50 years ago. I wonder what they're up to now. So I went to check them out. The last major surveys, 1972 through to 1976, by a guy named Steve Morton. So I head out to his survey sites. They happen to be at Western Treatment Plant in Werribee, Victoria. This site processes most of Melbourne's sewage, but it is also, quite fortunately, a fenced grassland reserve. It turns out people don't want to live super close to sewage, so there's just like a sewage plant and then there's a lot of land with a fence around it. And in those fences were apparently lots of dunnarts. So I set out there to the poo farm. Morton recorded over 700 fat-tailed dunnarts at these 4 sites across those years that he researched the dunnarts. And although all of this land is still run by Melbourne Water, unfortunately 2 of his main sites had been leased for agriculture and the landscape completely stripped of rocks for cropping. And this, of course, I didn't know until I turned up. And another was cleared for the construction of a grain silo, so there was a lovely concrete slab over it. So that left 1 site, okay, which did happen to be Morton's primary survey site. And I used a similar survey protocol to Morton over the course of 12 months. However, I actually also added in artificial habitat in the form of roof tiles to increase my chances of finding these dunnarts. So I surveyed 250 rocks in the landscape and 5 transects of roof tiles over a kilometre long each. So there was over 180 roof tiles, and I did this every month trying to look for these dunnarts. So I doubled his survey effort. So these are Morton's results showing the average amount of animals that he caught per month per year of his study, right? So I set out with intentions of adding another line to this graph because I wanted to see how species abundance may have changed over time. And here were my results. So in case you in case you missed it, that's it, right down there, right? N equals 0 for scientists. That means nada, 0 dunnarts. I did not find anything in a year of surveying. And I didn't find any individuals, scats, nests, any signs of this species in a year of surveying what was readily documented as not only a thriving population, but Victoria's largest population of this species. So to break this down further, when I commenced surveying, I knew it wasn't peak season for dunnarts. The weather was really warm, and I knew that realistically a lot of those dunnarts are going to be in the soil cracks, so it's unlikely for them to come up to the surface and be just sitting there waiting for me to find them. By the time May came and went, however, this is the month that Morton recorded an average of 89 fat-tailed dunnarts per survey. So he could be out there for one day and catch 89 fat-tailed dunnarts, and I wasn't catching any or seeing any signs of this species. So I guess I was starting to see a bit of a pattern and was a bit concerned. I did think for a while that it was just me and that I somehow was just really terrible at finding these animals. But I guess I had anticipated a reduction in the population size. I wasn't anticipating there to be absolutely no signs of this species because the literature so readily showed that they all cited that they were doing well out there. And this site in particular was well known to support a persisting population. July through to October, peak breeding season. If there's going to be dunnarts in a landscape, this is when you're going to see them because they're going to be out and about on the surface trying to find each other to make baby dunnarts, and I still wasn't finding any signs of them. So that solidified my concerns for this landscape. Okay, so while these results were in 2019, as of where we are currently in 2023, this result still stands. So there has not been another fat-tailed dunnart of any kind, whether it's an individual or signs of a nest or their scats collected at this site. So unfortunately, my results still stand. Now, why the population decline? So I use this site as a case study for a trend that's occurring across Victoria and likely other states as well. And that is that without appropriate fire regimes or grazing in our grassland landscapes, what we're seeing is complete ecosystem structural change. So our native grasslands are starting to look less like the left image and more like the right, and that's a really big problem. They're getting totally overgrown. So let's revisit our features of a basalt grassland. Intertussock spaces are the spaces between our native grassland tussocks. And these are an imperative part of the ecosystem and allow our fat-tailed dunnarts and other species to get out and find their food. So with the influx of invasive weeds and grasses, for example, Chilean needlegrass, phalaris, serrated tussock, what we're seeing is this invasive vegetation filling in all of those intertussock spaces and completely changing the structural integrity of the grassland. So when Morton conducted his surveys out in the 70s, I read that guy's PhD thesis more times than I think he did. He recorded that the grass being at 60 centimetres at its highest, whereas when I went out there, it was often taller than me. Okay, so it was totally looking different. Now, planned burns on both public and private properties are happening less and less due to reduction in appropriate climatic windows. Okay, hello, climate change. When they do happen, they're fantastic at eliminating those invasive weeds and keeping our native species going. So planned burns are integral for maintaining our grasslands. Because just remember, Australian ecosystems have evolved with fire. Not only do they cope with fire, they thrive with fire. All of our invasive weeds from other countries don't do so well. So planned burns are really important. Grazing is usually described as a negative in the ecology space. However, as far as maintaining grassland ecosystem structure, they do a pretty good job in the absence of fire. Sheep grazing keeps down some of that invasive vegetation and maintains those intertussock spaces. So grazing in this space is a better management tool than no management at all. And basalt rocks are integral to our fat-tailed dunnart habitat as well. Dunnarts don't dig tunnels straight into the earth. They will either dig under our rocks or do woody debris, or they utilise soil cracks. So once we remove these rocks, we have a pretty big problem. So keeping our basalt rocks in the landscape is integral. And this is particularly important in those wet months when the soil swells, our little soil cracks close over, and then our dunnarts need to come up to higher ground to find shelter. So that's particularly when they need those rocks. And unfortunately, in farming communities, farming machinery doesn't often work very well over rocks. So a lot of that is moved from the ecosystem. And then we have our soil cracks, which occur because these heavily fertile soils dry out during the summer heat, so they're really important too. In this weather, they provide a really important form of shelter for a whole range of grassland species, not just the fat-tailed dunnarts. So this is our summary of what the average grazed landscape looks like. We've got our basalt rocks, our soil cracks, our invasive vegetation, but also our sheep, keeping that down and maintaining our grassland structural integrity. This allows dunnart presence in the landscape. So let's look at our other type of agricultural land use, and that is cropping. And this involves a whole range of land management practices, including, obviously, removal of all the native species, but this leaves absolutely no room for fat-tailed dunnarts. So looking at Victoria specifically, 55% of the state is freehold agricultural land. That's 55%. Now, that means the majority of appropriate land for this species is currently privately owned. As global temperatures and levels of carbon dioxide are rising, in addition to more variable rainfall, our Victorian farmers are they're forced to accommodate a changing climate. So the practices are consistently changing. While climate change is having negative impacts for livestock farmers, these are actually grossly outweighed by positive impacts for crop farmers. And so what we're seeing is a dramatic increase in cropping across Victoria and a decrease in livestock practices. And what this means moving forward is more and more unsuitable land for fat-tailed dunnarts. And the other problem is that farmers of livestock often actively invest their time and their money in removing feral predators, for example, foxes and cats, because these predators pose a threat to their economic livelihood, right? Whereas if they're turning to cropping, I fear that we're going to have an absolute boom in these invasive species, because these Victorian farmers are often the ones who are on the front line removing these species from our ecosystem. So that's another problem that I foresee. In summary, we've got our basalt grasslands where our dunnarts are thriving, our grasslands featuring invasive vegetation. We've got landscapes featuring livestock, which still, they allow dunnart persistence. And then we've got our agricultural crops, which is the landscape that does not allow dunnart persistence at all. So this was all sort of during the first couple of years of my PhD. I started putting all this together because I thought that there was a pretty big problem happening and it hadn't been documented yet. So I wrote all this together. I collected evidence to show a dramatic population decline of fat-tailed dunnarts at the very site that was considered Victoria's largest population of the species. And I pieced together why I think this may be happening. Now, I also surveyed over 40 sites across Victoria, and all of those sites had previously recorded fat-tailed dunnarts in the past 10 years. I recorded dunnarts at 7 of them. So I went to 40 known populations of dunnarts. I found 7 of them currently still had this species. So in 2020, I submitted documentation to increase conservation status for this species. And only recently in May 2023, so 3 years later, I actually got this across the line. This species is one of Victoria's newest threatened species with a capital T, which means that they are on statutory legislation and they have some form of protection. Thank you. And this recently has been attracting some media attention, which has been really exciting that people care not alone just about the fat-tailed dunnart, which is the last marsupial of our grasslands, but it's really nice to be bringing attention to this critically endangered ecosystem that they live in. It's not a very sexy ecosystem. It doesn't attract near as much attention as our coral reefs, our rainforests, but it truly is an incredible ecosystem and it hosts, absolutely magnificent biodiversity. So it's truly a pleasure to work in this environment. You might see, I was recently on the second page of The Age, and that's that article, and it says, "Fierce furball needs a helping hand." I did not know if they were referring to the dunnarts or to me, but I figured, you know what, I'll take it. Thank you so much for listening to me be nerdy about my dunnarts. Thank you to the Dunnies.
All right. We've got some time for anyone to ask Millie some questions. If I just get some lights so I can see all your faces. Yeah. Wow. Turn it off. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, so we've got one just up there in the blazer cardigan.
I'm sorry for this. Two questions. The first is, what's next? And the other question is, how did you figure this out? Like, why did you get involved?
What's next?
What's next, and how did I get involved? Okay. Whoa. So, what's next is I have been applying for grants. I would like to get some funding. It all starts with money, unfortunately. I would like to complete more surveys across Victoria and assess where our stronghold populations of this species remain. And that's the starting point, across Victoria, sorry. Then I need to look across Australia because I don't know what's going on in the rest of the country with this species. I have a feeling they're doing better in the deserts than they are in the grasslands, but I need to kind of do that work. So that's the next thing that I would really like to do. At the moment, I'm kind of a one-woman team. So if anyone wants to do a PhD on fat-tailed dunnarts, I'm recruiting people. How did I get involved? It's a bit of a funny story, and that is that I guess I used fat-tailed dunnarts as a model species because they were common and quite prolific. I used that species as a model species for their more endangered relatives. So I wanted to use my research to help Tasmanian devils or northern quolls or eastern quolls and some of their more endangered relatives. But when I set out to find the species, I could not find them and then realised that they themselves were endangered. So that sort of transformed the direction of my research. But obviously, was more than happy to take on that challenge.
All right. Any other questions? Oh, yeah, one right at the front here.
What, at the legislative level, the Labor Party is about to introduce new national nature laws.
Yes.
So before the Dunnies get on that.
Dunny, yep.
What can they do?
Legislator, what can the Labor Party do with their new
Anti-Dunny.
anti-Dunny?
Anti-Dunny. So the biggest thing that I would hope that occurs from my getting this species listed as threatened is that now across the state, any developments that are occurring, and there's plenty across the grasslands, they have to check a list of species that might be in the area, and they're on that list. So if there's a chance that that species is on that list, they need to put measures in place and either try to survey for that species, find out if they're there, if there's a chance that they're there, maybe they need to, in some cases, just move the animals, which isn't ideal, but in some other cases, move the whole construction. And that's what I hope occurs moving forward. As far as what the Labor government are going to do, I have no idea, and honestly, it's one of those uphill battles that we just kind of fight in conservation. But for the moment, I'm just happy to have got this species listed, and I know that they're on that list, and I'll keep working towards improving that and getting it higher up on the list, I guess. Yeah. Oh, thank you.
Right. Okay, so we've got one at the front here in the green.
Would you recommend being in Western Grassland Reserve or Western Grassland?
I do.
So Western Grassland Reserve, where is that?
I do. The Western Grassland Reserve is a proposed, but also it's happening, grassland reserve, kind of ranging from Werribee across, it's across Little River, sort of heading towards Lara. I'm not actually sure where they head. Yeah, it includes the Liuyangs. It's this huge space, and I am actually aware of fat-tailed dunnarts being found in that area. So maybe that answers part of that person's question, which of next steps. There are areas where they have been located, not in large amounts, but the odd dunny has been located, and so trying to protect those areas is pretty important.
Sorry, can I have one more?
Yeah.
Do you think they'd be closer to Melbourne?
They certainly used to be in a lot of the small grassland reserves that are now in those little remnant patches quite close to the city. They used to be, but I guess those patches have become smaller and more separated from other grassland patches. And the foxes have come in, the cats have come in, and so a lot of the small patches and I say the small patches because most areas closer to Melbourne are the smaller patches of habitat. There's not many remaining, unfortunately. However, I can only hope that they continue to grow in population size and appear out of nowhere. But I stay faithful.
All right, we might take one more, but Millie will be around if you come up with any others. I see one at the very back that I think I've been looking at but not actually seeing.
Okay, so whales have been talked about as being amazing for carbon sink restoration. Lyrebirds do amazing things for forests when it
that's another PhD.
You want to do a PhD?
Do you know what? I'll write that down in my notebook when I get back to my desk, because that could be an amazing way of getting funding and getting support. Thank you for the suggestion. But no, I have not looked at that yet.
All right. There's one more question. Yep. Just here. Yep.
I just wondered, they look both adorable and murderous.
Yes, I love that.
What is it like just to hang out with them? Like, what kind of community am I?
I actually want to butt in here because once Millie took me to her little dunny colony. And they're cute. Yeah, they are. But they also stink. Because she feeds them cat food and you just walk in and it's just like
They're
little
gross.
carnivores and all this cat food everywhere. Okay, but your actual answer.
Well, thank you so much.
Yep.
It's quite funny. They all have incredible little personalities. They're all quite different. Some of them will literally just come up, sit on your hand and have no issues with that. They're super chill. That's what we call a more domesticated dunnart, and that's probably less what we want for putting if we're going to be having animals in the wild. Most of them do something more like this or this, which is just scream at me. They kind of hiss. They'll make, sort of open mouth threats, and they'll often just latch onto my finger and refuse to let go. They have drawn blood a couple times. They get this lock jaw situation, so once they latch on, they kind of don't let go, and you can't pull because their jaws are so sensitive, so you just kind of stand there like... Okay, all right, okay, let go, please. So, I mean, that's what it's like to hang out with them. It's most of the time, they're trying to kill me, really. Yeah.
All right, put your hands together for Emily.